Hi, my name is Olivia and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about some of the most bingeable thrillers that I've come across in the past handful of years. These were books that I absolutely could not put down, and many of them I read in a single sitting or within a very short time period. Since there are 7 books on the list and I don't want to make this video too long, let's get straight into talking about them. The first book that I wanted to mention is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This book is set at a summer camp, and it follows 2 different timelines set about a decade apart. The first of these timelines, chronologically, takes place when our protagonist is a child and is attending the summer camp. She goes in not knowing many people there and quickly meets and befriends her 3 other cabin mates. As the summer progresses, tensions begin to rise, and you see some normal childhood spats and fights popping up. But one day, all of her cabin mates mysteriously disappear without a trace. The entire camp is shut down, and everybody heads home for the summer. The second timeline picks up years later, when the camp actually decides to reopen after this incident. They begin recruiting old campers to return to the camp as counselors, and one of the people that's recruited is the protagonist from the very first timeline, the one who is staying in the same cabin as 3 girls who vanished in the middle of the night. She's apprehensive about returning, but ultimately does so, and mysterious things begin happening once she arrives at the camp. She's forced to both confront her past and try to figure out what happened to her cabin mates, as well as get to the bottom of what's happening in present day, as she begins to uncover more and more mysterious clues and hints as to what may actually be going on at the camp. Because this one was set at a summer camp, there were so many feelings of nostalgia for me. It definitely took me back to childhood, and I was really able to put myself in the shoes of each of the characters. I could see how, from a camper's perspective, it would be terrifying to have some of your friends go missing in the middle of the night without a trace. That's something that, as a child, I would have found incredibly unsettling, and I'm not sure that I could have brought myself to return to the camp all of those years later as a counselor. Needless to say, this book is fast-paced and action-packed, and if you haven't read any Riley Sager novels yet, I think this is a great one to start with. The writing style is simple, there's not very much description, and I think that's part of what causes Riley Sager's books to fly by. You also never got a good sense of where the plot was headed, and it was really difficult to predict or foresee any of the upcoming twists and turns. So I think that was another thing that made this a very successful thriller. The second book that I wanted to mention is The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks. This book centers on a female protagonist who cannot come to terms and accept the fact that her ex-husband has moved on, found someone new, and is planning to get married to that individual. The main character views his fiancée as the other woman, and she's both resentful and guilty for much of the book. Consequently, the protagonist follows around her ex-husband and his new fiancée, constantly ridiculing them and making them feel uneasy, even in the comfort of their own home. These constant interjections into her previous husband's marriage are really starting to affect his relationship with his fiancée, and you begin to see that unravel throughout the book. I really don't want to give too much away about this one because the less you know, the better. The way the plot is set up, if you go into this knowing a lot, I think it will spoil some of the key plot points. I'll be brutally honest. When I first heard about this book, the premise sounded like something that would be a love triangle out of a romance book rather than a thriller. I couldn't foresee it going anywhere good, and I was very apprehensive about the love triangle. I was worried that it would play a very prominent role in the book, and it would monopolize any of the what should be thrilling plot points. It seemed like this love triangle was just haphazardly being stuffed into the thriller genre at the expense of any of the chilling and truly terrifying components of the book, including the plot twists. Thankfully, I couldn't have been more wrong, and I can't believe I was on the fence about picking this book up in the first place. It also sounded surprisingly similar to The Girl on the Train, and that had me a little bit apprehensive. But as I continued further and further through the book, the plots couldn't have been more different. This book is told from multiple points of view, and initially you're really at a loss as to who is narrating each section of the book. That comes as one of the big reveals toward the middle or 2/3 of the way through the book, and that was really successful for me. It caught me off guard. I thought I had figured out exactly who is narrating each section of the book, but I was very, very wrong. On that note, there's one huge plot twist at the very end of the book, but there are also many smaller twists and turns scattered throughout the narrative. So it's not something that'll keep you waiting for the last 30 pages of the book before the big reveal. You do get quite a few of those thrilling, suspenseful moments earlier on in the book, so it's definitely something that'll keep you engaged and keep you coming back for more. I found all of the twists to be very thoroughly thought out and planned, and they were also executed extremely well. It was clear that the author put a lot of thought into placing clues and hints throughout the narrative, but keeping them subtle enough that it was challenging to guess at what was really going on behind the scenes. Every single twist caught me completely by surprise, which is rare for a thriller. But looking back at earlier portions of the book, I realized that there had been clues and hints scattered throughout all along that I had completely missed. These made the ending and the final twist completely plausible, but I managed to overlook them entirely the first time through the book. I must say, the plot feels like it's a little bit all over the place in this book, with some deviations that I didn't really expect and didn't see coming. But that's part of what makes this book so surprising and entertaining. Moving on to my third pick, that's My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. This book is told from the perspective of a husband and wife duo who get off on murdering people, and they're very upfront with this, even from the beginning of the book. They state it outright, pretty much from page 1, and they act like it's a very, very normal thing to do. Murder is presented in such a casual and nonchalant manner, and it really gives you an insight into each of these characters' minds and what they're thinking as they're going through with all of these crimes. Because of this, the narration in this book was spectacular, and I can't recommend it enough. The author does an excellent job of showing you the world through the lens of a couple who have absolutely no problem or no qualms with murdering people. They don't see anything wrong with it, and they're very openly sharing their thoughts with you about who they're going to murder next and how they're planning to do it. It provides readers with really in-depth insights into their thought processes and their rationales for all of the crimes that they're committing. It is also very interesting to see how they were able to put on an act of sorts when they were around other people, allowing them to hide their murderous tendencies from those around them. It was incredibly eerie in that sense, and really causes you to question some of your interactions with others and what exactly everyone is hiding. From the outside, this couple appears perfectly normal, or if not perfectly normal, very close to that. So it was really interesting to see the dichotomy between their murderous sides and their normal, oh, we're just the everyday people next door persona. I absolutely could not stop reading this book. I was sucked in immediately, and I had a bit of a morbid fascination with watching these people commit crime after crime and see nothing wrong in what they were doing. They truly had no remorse and were confident that they weren't going to get caught, and that was something that took me by surprise, but kept me coming back for more. They saw zero faults with their behavior, and it was something that was hard to look away from as they continued to bury themselves deeper and deeper with every crime that they committed. The fourth book that I wanted to mention is Bird Box by Josh Malerman, and I'll try to keep my explanation and summary for this one brief, especially because it shot up in popularity as soon as the movie was released. This book is set on Earth, and it takes place after Earth has been overrun by these mysterious creatures. Whenever an individual looks at one of these creatures, they begin to harm those around them and eventually commit suicide themselves. Consequently, it's a bit of a post-apocalyptic book, and you get to see people struggling to survive, breaking into stores and restaurants, trying to steal food and essentials, and just trying to get by from day to day. You follow a protagonist who's actually pregnant from before all of this started. As she's trying to fend for herself, she stumbles across a house that's actually inhabited by a group of other people, and this is something that wasn't particularly common. Most people had either left town or been killed by the mysterious creatures. She's fortunate in that she gets taken in by this group of individuals and quickly befriends them. And throughout the book, you get to follow their struggles to survive and their attempts to learn more about the creatures that are hunting them. I would highly, highly recommend this book, even if you have seen the movie. The film adaptations strayed quite a bit from the book, so there are definitely some twists and turns that you're not aware of, and that'll probably stump you when you're reading through the book. I think one of the greatest strengths of this book was that it took away one of the 5 senses of the characters. They were no longer able to see when they were outdoors, outside of the safe haven of the house that they were living in. Because of this, all of their other senses were described in so much more depth and detail, and it really transported you to the story, making it feel like you were there, right alongside each of the characters. The fact that you have no idea what these creatures look like, even by the end of the book, is one of the most terrifying components. You don't have a good visual to put to all of these creatures causing mass destruction, and it's something that you're continually trying to figure out as the book progresses. Even by the conclusion, many of the characters have little to no answers about what's hunting them down, and that's something that's really creepy and chilling, and it definitely left me thinking about it for days and weeks after I finished reading. With respect to the pacing, there's very little downtime in this book. It seems like there's constantly something happening and at least one or more characters in peril at any given time. I read this from cover to cover in a single sitting, and I don't regret that at all. I think it would have been very hard, if not impossible, to tear myself away from this story because I was so invested in each of the characters. The fifth book that I wanted to discuss is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. I am very thankful to have received an ARC of this book from the publishers in exchange for an honest review, which will be posted a little bit closer to release date. This book is currently scheduled to be published on August 4th, 2020, so be on the lookout for my review as we get closer to that date. This book follows two different mysteries simultaneously. One took place present day, and you get to see much of that unfold in real time, while the other took place decades earlier and went unsolved, and you're only hearing about this timeline after the fact. The book opens with podcast host Rachel Krall traveling to the small town of Neapolis to cover a controversial rape trial on the upcoming season of her true crime podcast. In previous seasons, Rachel had taken an investigative stance and sifted through all of the details and information about the cases that she was looking into. In each of these cases, she managed to uncover new information that hadn't been part of the original trials, and this helped to overturn convictions and put the right people behind bars. When she first arrives in Neapolis, she has a mysterious letter for her left on the dashboard of her car, and it asks her to look into a supposed drowning that occurred 25 years earlier in the same seaside town. The author of the letter refuses to accept accidental drowning as this individual's cause of death, and she's seeking justice, as well as information about how this individual actually died. This was an incredibly heavy-hitting book, and it definitely dealt with some difficult topics, which it went into quite in depth. So if that's not something that you're comfortable reading about, I would recommend skipping this one and picking up some of my other recommendations in this video. However, if you are comfortable reading about some of the more graphic details of rape, murder, and assault, then I would highly recommend this one. I think it opens up interesting conversations and commentaries on how these events are perceived by the media and by the public, as well as how individuals are treated after these events take place. It gives you insights, especially into the small town mentality of how rape victims are treated and how, by extension, their families are also treated. I think this is something that isn't focused on often enough and is not portrayed accurately in the media and other avenues of information. So I think the book is really powerful in that sense. It opens up a dialogue where I think we were previously lacking or missing one. But most importantly, the author is very respectful in all of these discussions. And she did her due diligence to really research all of the possible points of views that come into play in these scenarios. She also only included details that were crucial for the plot. She certainly wasn't including graphic scenes for the heck of it. Each one had a purpose, and it helped reveal new information about the mysteries that you were trying to solve alongside Rachel. I thought this was a very powerful read, and I'm definitely going to be picking up books by this author in the future. The sixth book that I wanted to mention is Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane, and this is actually the first book in a series, which currently has 4 books to it. This first installment starts off with Gina Royal and her 2 children arriving home to find cops swarming over her property and in her garage. Little did she know, for the past several years of their marriage, her husband had converted their garage into a torture chamber and was essentially capturing and torturing young women to death in the garage. Gina was completely innocent in all of this and unaware that it was even happening. Yet police and the media began lumping her in with her husband, claiming that they were both responsible and committed the crimes together. Because of the public outrage that this sparks, Gina and her children are forced to continually move around the country and change their identities, trying to remain under the radar and not arouse suspicion as to their pasts. When she finally settles in a small town near Stillhouse Lake, she thinks she's found a great place to set up some roots and get to know some of the people in the community. But then dead bodies began showing up in the lake, and all of these individuals were murdered in the exact same manner that her husband committed his murders. Gina's forced to confront this and try to get to the bottom of what's actually happening in this little town. This book is absolutely terrifying, and it was one that kept me up at night while I was reading it. It really shows you that there are 2 or even more sides to every person, and it was incredible to watch her husband switch from a perfectly nice family guy to a downright evil and sinister individual. One of the things that made this even more raw and gripping was watching the children and how they were affected by all of this. They slowly started to unravel throughout the book, and it was something that was really saddening and horrifying to watch. This book also contains so much confusion, which was one of the things that kept drawing me back in and sucking me into reading more. It also ended in a cliffhanger, which shouldn't be surprising because it's part of a series. That led me to pick up the next book in the series very, very quickly. While thrillers aren't generally told in a series format, I think it really does work for this series. And if you're looking for something that'll give you a little bit of a longer time commitment and more pages to get to know each of the characters, I would definitely recommend starting with this book. And last but not least, I felt like I couldn't film this video and do it justice without mentioning Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. This book is set in the US in 1954, when a US Marshal and his partner are sent out to Shutter Island to visit Ashcliffe Hospital for the Criminally Insane. The hospital had recently reported that one of its patients, who was a convicted murderess, had escaped and was roaming the island, and they had no idea how she escaped, how she was hiding and surviving on the island, and where she could be. So this book follows the two marshals as they arrive on the island and begin to investigate the mysterious circumstances that they find once they get there. In this book, nothing is as it seems, and this is one of the most shocking reveals that I've ever read to date. The twists and turns in this book were so incredibly well planned and executed, and I saw none of them coming, even though the groundwork had been laid from page 1 of the book. I can't believe how deceived I was by this narrative. I saw nothing coming and had no idea that some seemingly insignificant details actually turned out to be incredibly important. Lehane's writing style is incredibly gripping and compelling, and he really makes sure that he's not including any extraneous details. Everything matters in this book, and it's hard to keep track of all of the nitty-gritty hints and clues that he reveals along the way. While you might not be as wowed by this book if you've already seen the movie, I would still recommend it. It's a great read and a great example of a very solid thriller. If you haven't watched the movie yet, I would beg you to read the book first. The book is 10 times better than the film adaptation, and I can't recommend it enough. And that brings me to the end of this video. Let me know if you've picked up any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd also be curious to hear down in the comments if you have any thriller recommendations that you could not put down while you were reading. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.